Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome inside the Guilty as Charged podcast. As always, my name is Steven, and I am your host. Joining me tonight for a very special episode is Mr. Hayden Winks of Underdog Fantasy, the best in the business right now. Hayden, thanks for taking the time to join me tonight. How are you doing?
Well, I'm not sure about all that. I'm glad to be here. Talk Chargers, my old stomping ground. Still root for them a little bit. I can't go all in like always, but I'm happy to be here.
There we go. I did not know that before just now. So, hopefully we can get you at least back into the fold a little bit. Come to some games. Hayden did attend the Chargers scrimmage on Sunday, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But the main focus of today's conversation is going to be about the Chargers fantasy football outlook. I myself am about ready to do some drafts in the next couple weeks. I know most people are, so it's always a good hint that football is about to be back when people start emailing you about leagues and payouts and things like that. So it's a good time. So before we dive in, Hayden, I do want to let you kind of shout out Underdog a little bit. Tell our listeners where they can find your guys' platform, where they can find your work, and really kind of what makes Underdog unique from some of the other fantasy platforms out there.
So Underdog Fantasy, we specialize right now in the best ball format of fantasy football, and that's the unique spin where all you have to do is draft. There's no setting lineups, there's no trades, there's no waiver wires. So the good news about that is you can do a bunch of them. Like right now, if you have a home league on Labor Day, all for that. But I think to prep for it, you can do some best ball drafts. You can do 5, 10 of them. The biggest tournament in fantasy football history is Best Ball Mania 3, $10 million in prizes. You can enter that today for $25. If you use promo code Hayden, I'll match your deposit up to $100. But the real thing with the best ball is everything's about upside in that format. The biggest weekly score, you're playing against hundreds of thousands of people, but it is a great way to prepare for your home league. So if you are doing one, instead of doing some silly mock draft, do a best ball league, get used to it. It's getting bigger and bigger every single year, and the industry is growing and Underdog's kind of leading the way.
Yeah, just as a casual supporter, like I do a lot of leagues, right? And I'm the commissioner at my work league. And I always talk to people, try and convince them to join the league. And it's always like, it's too much time. Like I don't want to spend all that time preparing for the draft or setting my lineup each week. So if you like fantasy football, but don't necessarily want to commit to the full-time aspect of it, I think doing best ball is a great way to accomplish that mission and scratch the itch, if you will.
That's right.
So, like I said, I did want to get some of your thoughts from the scrimmage before we dive in here. I know you kind of tweeted about this, but first and foremost, man, what do you think of the vibe down there in Costa Mesa, fan turnout, physicality of the scrimmage, all that good stuff?
So I was on the marketing team when they transitioned from San Diego to Los Angeles, and it was difficult to get fans to show up for the training camp. I was there every single day, bright and early, doing all that. And when the first thing I noticed is the hype is real. Like there was, I would say, like no joke, like maybe 5 times as many people. And now there's obviously a difference between Tuesday versus Sunday, but it was a packed facility. In the scrimmage was narrated by Matt Money Smith and Daniel Jeremiah. Just the energy looks a lot different, a lot more Chargers jerseys. So I think that it takes a while. And I've obviously in LA specifically, I've seen this with my Trojans. You got to be winning if you want the fans to come out, and this roster is basically as good as anybody. So step one is a lot of the fans were there, and then we can get into the actual scrimmage. But it was good news for just the Chargers in general. The footprint does seem to be growing.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked a little bit about this on our show, but I never got to go to training camp in San Diego, but I went back in 2000. That would have been 2019, and even that year, the Chargers were coming off of a 12-4 playoff season, right? They won a playoff game, and we were there for the whole weekend. It was the Thursday, Friday, Saturday situation, and the Saturday practice was busy, but the Thursday and Friday practices was like maybe a couple hundred people in the stands and not that many on the fence line. So to see the turnout that has come this year has been fantastic. And I'm not super surprised that the scrimmage was busy, right? Like you mentioned, but even on their Wednesday practice last week, they had a ton of fans show up. So shout out to everybody that's been attending. There's been lots of content coming out. So it's been a great time.
Yep.
All right, so let's dive in here. Like I mentioned, fantasy football preview here with Underdog Fantasy's Hayden Winks. First and foremost, of course, have to start with the quarterback position, Justin Herbert. I mean, I feel like a lot of people who are listening to this podcast are going to draft him pretty high and pretty early. Where are you at with like the appropriate time to draft somebody like Justin Herbert? Do you think he is worth drafting in kind of that tier one of the fantasy quarterbacks, and or are you kind of more on the side that maybe he's going to regress a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Justin Herbert's going to be like a negative regression candidate from all these nerds with their models, myself included. The problem is he's so damn good that he's going to be playing above expectation every single year. So I have him with the tier ones. I think right now on Underdog Fantasy, he's going right next to Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson in the late 4th round. I think that's appropriate. I'm drafting Justin Herbert. I kind of do have a rule though with Justin Herbert is I'm not drafting him unless I have either Keenan Allen or Mike Williams who go in the 3rd round. But to me, Justin Herbert is sensational. I think that he can push Patrick Mahomes as the best quarterback in the league. I think that he's a candidate for 5,000 yards again. He can lead the league in touchdowns. His team plays with pace. I think they could pass the ball even a little bit more. The offensive line looks better as long as they can get the right tackle position handled, but he's as good as it gets. And I think that the weapons around him going into year 3 gives him a chance to be the MVP this year.
So you mentioned, of course, stacking Justin with one of his wide receivers, and we'll get to the wide receivers in a second. Why only if you're stacking it? And, kind of what is the benefit, in your opinion, of doing a quarterback, receiver 1, receiver 2 kind of stack like that?
So this goes into some of the best ball things where I'm talking about. So used to talking about best ball, and you got to come in first out of 100,000 people or more. And that's where you need to get the stacking. And the thing is if you already invested into Mike Williams in round 3, you're already betting on the Chargers in some capacity. So might as well bet on the quarterback. And if you drafted Justin Herbert in the 4th round, how are you going to advance in the playoffs against other teams that would he would obviously be throwing to either Mike Williams or Keenan Allen? So in your redraft league, if you're just going against your coworkers, it's far less important. But if you're playing on Underdog and you're trying to win these big best ball tournaments, stacking is key. And I even think in your home league, stacking is still key. It adds a little correlation and a little bit of upside. You're just betting on the entire offense. So I think ultimately it's smart no matter the format. It's especially smart in the best ball format.
Yeah, I know me personally, last year I got to stack Tom Brady and Chris Godwin in my work league last year, and it was fantastic. It was a great choice, if I do say so myself. But I'm a big fan of stacking in general. So you mentioned the wide receivers. I'm curious again, kind of your thoughts on the scrimmage here, what you saw there. There's been some talk, I know, in the fantasy community that Mike Williams might be, surpassing Keenan Allen in terms of being the more valuable player. Where do you land in that conversation, and what do you see from the scrimmage, if anything, that kind of could give you some more insight there?
So I rank Mike Williams ahead of Keenan Allen. Underdog Fantasy's half PPR. I think you can make the argument in full PPR. Keenan Allen is still ahead, but I think Mike Williams coming off a career high 1.97 yards per route run. He's entering the prime of his career, 28 years old. He just got paid. He's healthy, which is something that we haven't been able to say early in Mike Williams' career. And the big thing with Mike Williams is his role pretty much changed last year. He was in this quote unquote Michael Thomas role where his A.dot dropped down to a career low 12 yards downfield, more intermediate routes, more underneath routes. He can still, with the best of them, win downfield and down the perimeter. And we all know that Justin Herbert can hit that route. But Mike Williams, to me, has a higher upside than Keenan Allen. I'm not fully concerned about Keenan Allen, but looking at yards per route run over the last, now it's 5 years. It's gone from 2.5 to 2.3 to 2 flat to 1.9. And last year was 1.8. So it's 5 consecutive years where his efficiency has dropped. He's now 30 years old. So I think it's nothing against Keenan Allen. One of my favorite players, still very good at the game. But I think that the way Mike Williams wins is better in best ball. I think he has the higher ceiling in general. The offense is tailored for him, and he's now in the prime of his career.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment, especially from a fantasy football perspective. I'm curious really kind of what becomes of Mike Williams this year, because if you go on reception perception with Matt Harmon, like he was top 4 or 5, I think, in percentage of his routes that were slants specifically, and also go balls 9 routes. So that was basically what he was running was a lot of slants and a lot of go balls and then some posts and corners and things like that. So I'm curious to see if that changes at all this year, because I do think he can take, another step as purely as a wide receiver. Would love to get him some more digs and drags and just let him get the ball in his hands and go make some plays after the catch.
I did see in the scrimmage a couple of times on just simple out routes, like a 3rd and 8, and it was just an out route. And Daniel Jeremiah, and it's very true. Mike Williams has been threatening people deep for years, and he's well respected as a deep receiver. He's kind of developing a little bit more where now that he's pressing deep, and if he can cut back in or cut back out that dig route, then out route, Justin Herbert has the ability to throw that thing on the perimeter 10 yards downfield on an out route. And he made a couple of first downs in the scrimmage. I don't want to read too much into it, but I do think that just Mike Williams is transcending. They obviously just paid him, and where Mike Williams wins is exactly where Justin Herbert wins. So the other thing is, if like Keenan Allen got injured, and I hope Keenan Allen doesn't get injured, Mike Williams to me could be like a top 5 fantasy receiver.
Yeah.
This offense is so damn good, and his red zone work is impenetrable, and he's winning underneath more. So I think that big Mike Williams is somebody that in the 3rd round in any format, especially in best ball, I love Big Mike.
There you go. So you feel like a 3rd round for both of them, though? Maybe Mike a little earlier than that, though?
Yeah, I think Keenan Allen, I think in most leagues is going to get drafted ahead of Mike Williams, but like the niche fantasy football grinder, it's kind of the consensus is kind of flipped where it's Mike Williams ahead of Keenan Allen. But I think both of them are reasonable picks somewhere in the 3rd, 4th round.
There we go. The niche fantasy football grinder. I love that phrase. We talked offhand a little bit about Josh Palmer. He had some great quotes today. I don't know if you saw that, but he, I guess in the offseason, went back all the way to Keenan Allen's rookie season to watch film on Keenan Allen. So I'm so curious to see how they'll use him. He was pretty diverse across the board in terms of route running aspect. He was, I think he was top 20, if I'm not mistaken, in post and corner routes, but we saw some glimpses that he could also fill in for, the Keenan Allen power slot role when Keenan Allen was out with COVID last year. So a lot of hype around Josh Palmer, a lot of potential for a breakout season. What do you think we see from him in year 2 this year?
So in this scrimmage, he was firmly the wide receiver 3. Whenever they go into 2 wide receiver sets, obviously he comes off the field, but Jalen Guyton didn't mix in until much later into the scrimmage. I do think that Guyton still has a role because he's the fastest of the 4 main receivers here. So if they do need a really deep post route and stuff, I can see Jalen Guyton getting in there. But I do think Palmer's going to be more of a full-time player. And the good thing about Josh Palmer is I'm not sure if there's a certain skill that he has that's dominant. That's why he was a day 2 pick, but he has a versatility, and that's really nice for fantasy and nice for the Chargers. There was 2 games late last season that really caught my eye. One, Keenan Allen missed time. He played 74% of his snaps in the slot that week. Couple weeks later, Mike Williams misses time. Then he goes to the outside. He's an 86% of his snaps are on the perimeter. And you just don't really see that. And he can kind of win both ways. He's got a nice physical body. He can kind of do a little bit of everything. I think that's why, and for fantasy purposes, if either one of Mike Williams or Keenan Allen misses time, even just for a couple weeks, Josh Palmer, I think, is going to be like a weekly wide receiver 3 type with some upside. And I think that going into, was this year 2 or year 3 for him?
Year 2, yeah.
I just think that he has a chance to be a full-time player. And last year he was splitting time with Jalen Guyton, and I think that's going to be more of like an 80-20 rather than like a 60-40 split that it was last year.
Yeah, and I mean, for what it's worth, it has been pretty clear that he is wide receiver 3. I think from the jump in training camp, we heard quickly that Josh Palmer was kind of viewed as an ascending player by this team, and they're really excited about him to get him more involved. Again, I mentioned just kind of his route distribution. I would love to see him get some of the short area yards after catch potential opportunities as well. Because, I mean, we all love Keenan Allen, right? But that's just not who he is anymore at this point. So would love to just, allow him to get the ball in his hands and just let him go to work a little bit. So there was a bit of a hype scenario on Sunday, and that is, of course, Deandre Carter that Chargers fans are buzzing about. Do you think you saw enough from him on Sunday or heard enough about him that he could be viewed as kind of a potential dark horse fantasy player this year?
Short answer, no, but he was definitely mixing in, and he does have some pop. And like Josh Palmer, Keenan Allen's, Mike Williams, if you had like a relay race of like 3 wide receiver sets, the Chargers would be definitely in the bottom half in the league. So he definitely provides a
Yeah.
little pop there. Not expecting him to hit on the fantasy radar. I think that he's the main kick returner or punt returner as well. Going
Yeah.
back to the underneath stuff that you're talking about with Josh Palmer, I did notice Gerald Everett kind of doing a lot of that stuff where they would be putting him in motion. He was lining up in the slot and a lot of drag routes and that stuff. And it was only one scrimmage, but that's kind of where he's won. And Jared Cook wasn't necessarily providing that last year. He just didn't look the same. So I do wonder if we're going to get Gerald Everett, who's more on the smaller side among tight ends. He was a full-time player in the scrimmage the first couple drives with Justin Herbert. He might be the guy where you need somebody to roll out against a linebacker, throw into the flats, and maybe he's the short yards after the catch guy. But
Sure.
maybe Josh Palmer has a little more pop than I'm expecting. But I do think that maybe that's one of the differences is Gerald Everett versus Jared Cook is maybe Gerald Everett down the flats as that yards after the catch guy might work out.
Yeah, getting into the tight ends, I think, there's a clear difference for me in the way that they're using Everett and Donald Parham because, I mean, Jared Cook was clearly like they're a true tight end one for them last year, much to the chagrin of Chargers fans at certain times. But I feel like it's pretty clear that they want Gerald Everett to kind of be that short area yards after catch guy. And Donald Parham has been the vertical threat so far, the seam stretcher, if you will. So curious to get your thoughts there. There's, again, a lot of hype around Gerald Everett playing with Justin Herbert, playing in this offense. Where do you feel like is a good time to draft him, or are you kind of avoiding him again because of Donald Parham and all these other guys that we're talking about from a fantasy perspective?
Yeah, Gerald Everett's kind of been a fantasy football tease for the last couple years, and
Yeah,
he's struggled in the red zone. Jared Cook struggled in the red zone, but Jared Cook had so many opportunities in the red zone last year. He was 5th in red zone routes per game. The Chargers' offense in general with their tight ends were 6th in routes, 9th in targets. So there is some fantasy appeal from Gerald Everett. I think ultimately he's going to be a very inconsistent tight end too. But if you are getting in the inconsistent tight end twos, might as well have him be attached to Justin Herbert.
yeah,
So I have been drafting some Gerald Everett. I didn't get a chance to see what's going to happen in the red zone because Parham wasn't active during that scrimmage. I don't believe. So I'm curious. Maybe in the third preseason game, we'll see if Gerald Everett's out there in the red zone. But as for the scrimmage, Gerald Everett was a full-time player. So I'm hoping he's getting those red zone looks because if he's not, he's just too far down the target totem pole to really matter. But if it's like him and Evan Ingram, like I can see similar roles for those two types, and one's playing with an MVP candidate and the other is a
yeah,
second year player.
yeah, absolutely. So again, for what it's worth, Donald Parham, and when he was healthy, it was like every time they go to red zone period, it was like Donald Parham touchdown, Donald Parham touchdown. So he's been more of the red zone guy from what we've seen. Again, was not playing when you were there, but Parham has been the seam stretcher, the red zone threat from at least what we've heard so far.
Yeah.
I will shift gears again to the running back here. Briefly about Austin Eckler. Obviously, 20 touchdowns last year is going to be very, very difficult for him to repeat. But how early are you kind of advising people to draft Austin Eckler this year, and what are you expecting from him?
He's my 5th overall player. I think there's a teardrop after the top 4, and my top 4 is Christian McCaffrey. Got to play for the upside. I don't care about the injuries. Jonathan Taylor after what he did last year, and then Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson. Jefferson playing in Cooper Kupp's role. Cooper Kupp being like one of the most elite fantasy wide receivers of all time. And then after that, that's when you get into Jamar Chase, Austin Eckler, Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, Najee Harris. And I'm just going with Austin Eckler. Yes, he's a negative regression candidate, but he still was 2nd in expected touchdowns per my model up at 13.5. As long as he keeps that goal line roll, which I am expecting. Josh Kelly was kind of mixing in the red zone during that scrimmage, but it ultimately did go back to Austin Eckler. He's just too good down there, and obviously in the pass game, I just want to be betting on this offense. So maybe not the best 5th overall pick in fantasy history, but I do think of the other options, Dalvin Cook and some of these other guys, I'm just going to repeat last year, and I have him as my 5th overall player.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Over Derrick Henry, though, that's I think a lot of people would be surprised by that. But
I'm a
again,
little worried about just the Titans offense. Their offensive line doesn't look as good.
sure.
AJ Brown was like kind of maybe holding up Ryan Tannehill, and I wasn't the big Treelon Burks guy, so I'm a little nervous about that offense just in general.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. You mentioned Joshua Kelly. I think a lot of fantasy people kind of drafting Isaiah Spiller, and I do think that at some point he does kind of become the RB2, but Joshua Kelly has really surprised a lot of people in training camp this year after not really being very successful last season. I feel like you're talking about both of these guys as handcuffs, but where are you potentially at with both of these players?
So Isaiah Spiller was clearly the fourth running back. He was playing with a second team offense, and him and Larry Roundtree were rotating, and it was Josh Kelly coming in to spell Austin Eckler in the middle of the first drive with Justin Herbert in that scrimmage. I do think that
And
Joshua
it's been
Kelly
that
has,
way. Again, sorry to interrupt.
yeah,
It's been that way.
it really has been that way. So I think it's just going to take some time. Isaiah Spiller is just like a very big body, and like he was the youngest player in the draft, but he was a little bit thicker than I was expecting. But the good thing with Isaiah Spiller is, yeah, he's probably not going to be the most explosive back. He doesn't have the most pop to his game, but I thought that he was reasonably good in pass protection on film. He had 29, 20, and 25 receptions in his 3 collegiate seasons. Early declare from the SEC, had 200 touches in each one of those seasons. And I mean, I hate to say it, but Josh Kelly and Larry Roundtree averaged 3.2 and 2.4 yards per carry last year. So I'm not fully in on Isaiah Spiller, but I do think that he could handle a bell cow workload or a 60% workload. He's got the body type for it, and he's got the hands, maybe even the pass protection. So I am rolling the dice. He goes 120th overall on Underdog Fantasy. Josh Kelly does not get drafted. I think this is one of those things where it might take some time. We might not even see it into preseason week 3, but I think ultimately, if Austin Eckler goes down in week 8, I would guess it's going to be Isaiah Spiller by that point.
Yeah, at that point, I would expect Isaiah to kind of, overtake Josh Kelly. But you never know with these guys. I mean, it's a weird situation because this regime did not draft Joshua Kelly. They drafted Larry Roundtree, and they kind of handed Roundtree the reins early on last year. But then it was just like out of nowhere. It was like, okay, we're just going to pivot to Josh Kelly, and they kind of stuck with him in the second half of last season, at least as that RB2. And then Justin Jackson happened. It was weird, man. It was so weird last year from a running back perspective. So
they couldn't run it. Yeah, it was the backups, and I think that's why Austin Eckler's been so vocal about, please get me a RB2 here. And I think Isaiah Spiller, he wasn't like the most flashy prospect to me, but if you're doing that in the SEC and you got the body type, I think like those are the type of players that hang around, they get snaps. Ultimately, I think that he could be the number 2 long term. Just Josh Kelly, he's had the opportunities to grab that role and just hasn't fully done it in the NFL. So I'm not fully buying the Josh Kelly, but as of right now, he for sure is the RB2 if the game started today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Hayden, man, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. Really appreciate you spending 23 minutes right now. I kept you longer than I said I would. But hopefully Charger fans go check you and Underdog Fantasy out and, keep crushing it, man. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate you. In my bold predictions, I said the Chargers are going to win the Super Bowl. What could go wrong? You can find me on Twitter at Hayden Winks. We got all the podcasts, all that stuff. Go Chargers.
There we go. Speaking it into existence. I really appreciate it. And again, Chargers fans, go check him out. Follow him on Twitter, all that good stuff.